This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, Lewitt, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now on the new Lewitt Ray microphone with Aura, Auto Gain, and EQ mode through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic pre, mixed through Isotope, Voice Enhancement Assistant RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
I'm going to LA later today, and then I'm back for 2 days in which I have concerts and sessions in New York. Then I go to London for 4 days, then I come back for 1 day, then I go to DC to mix a concert at the White House. And from DC I go directly to Mexico to mix another John Zorn show, and that gets me into early week of December.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Atom Audio's S-Series, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors featuring 5 models from the compact S2V all the way up to the powerful S5H. The range builds on Atom Audio's iconic heritage with new technology for improved acoustic performance. With new woofers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine, the S-Series ensures accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail, and a forward-looking digital connectivity. Backed by a 5-year guarantee, Atom Audio monitors embody durability and professional sound for your studio at atomaudio.com. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Marc Urselli, a 7-time Grammy Award-nominated, 3-time Grammy Award-winning music producer, audio engineer, mixer, sound designer, and front-of-house engineer. Marc Urselli is an interdisciplinary artist, scholar, and devotee of all things art, sound, and music, and works for and collaborates with musical and visual artists, bands, musicians, composers, theater directors, film, TV, brand, and mixed media multidisciplinaries from around the world. He's worked with U2, Foo Fighters, Nick Cave, Lou Reed, Sting, Keith Richards, Kesha, Jeff Beck, Les Paul, Buddy Guy. Huge list of artists, to name just a few, in styles ranging from rock, pop, metal, jazz, experimental, avant-garde, new music, urban, electronica, and classical. He also collaborates as an artist himself on some of the records, which you can hear in the playlist, which we have here in the show notes. So please make sure to scroll down and click on that and check it out as well. Marc currently resides and works as chief house engineer for the historic and legendary recording studio EastSide Sound in New York City. And he has been a guest on the podcast before for episodes RSR264 and 378. Again, also in the playlist, where you can hear Marc's backstory and music and get some excellent recording and mixing tips as well. Thanks again to Rudy Rupshan for our original intro and to Atom Audio. Please welcome back Marc Urselli to Recording Studio Rockstars. Marc, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm rocking my life.
Right on, man. Speaking of rock, some of the music that's in your playlist is strikingly heavy rock, and like some of it is sort of amazingly slow tempo too. And I wanted to ask you about that production. So now a lot of the stuff you're doing is recorded right there at EastSide Sound.
Yes, correct.
So you, I guess you call it kind of like, I thought of it as like doom metal, doom. Some of it is almost like doom jazz, you know, where it's like there's heavy guitars and sounds and drums that just accent along with it. Tell us a little bit about some of those projects that have been your favorite. I mean, I think there were artists like Hexatic and Kilter were some of the ones that really just kind of leapt out at me as well.
Yeah. Hexatic was a project that I did with Stephen O'Malley of Sano, and Tim Wiskida on drums, the drummer of Khanate, and most recently Insect Arc. And it's just we just got together and decided to record some music without really knowing what was going to happen with it. But we were pretty happy with the results. So one long form piece of that came out on a compilation. The other,
Solastalgia, I think, was one of the songs.
Exactly. It was it was one of multiple takes or multiple pieces that we did. The others have never come out, and who knows, maybe someday they will. And the other thing you mentioned, Kilter is a band from New York consisting of Laurent David on bass, Kenny Grohowski on drums. He's one of my favorite drummers in New York, effortlessly going from jazz to metal to fusion. And Ed Rosenberger III on saxophone, Barry saxophone. So it's a very interesting lineup of, drums, bass, and sax. And they asked me to produce their, I think it was the one before the last record, and then they did one after that I only mixed and co-produced. And I had a lot of fun working on that. I mean, Kenny's such an incredible drummer. To begin with, I've made, maybe 30 records with Kenny Grohowski in various lineups, primarily with John Zorn. But then working on this Kilter record allowed me a lot more sonic freedom than usual, because being the producer, I was able to come up with ideas and sonic treatments that are not the normal thing you would do on a metal record, because it's not a metal record and it's not a jazz record. It's somewhere in between. So I played with a lot of filters and delays and flangers and all sorts of effects that you would normally not apply to drums, but I got really creative with it and they really loved it. And so we were all very happy with that.
Yeah, that's super fun. I mean, I think some of the tracks just sort of start with this reverse snare delay and stuff, but like exactly. Also this stylistically, I hear that, and I would describe it as very graphic, cinematic kind of music also, because it really creates a sense of space and mood, and high fidelity as well. So it's heavy, but it strikes you as something that you should really listen. I mean, that you would really enjoy on a hi-fi system, because it's so impactful. And my first thought was like, how do you even go about recording music like that, where it's not like, all right, everybody, 5, 6, 7, 8, here we go. What are some of the things that help you make a record like that? Is line of sight just crucial for that kind of music? Are people reading sheet music and sort of counting to themselves like an orchestral musician?
All of the above, yes. Those are all written pieces that start from sheet music that I think Laurent primarily composes, but the others write also. And then line of sight is absolutely vital, because they're giving each other cues. So because they're very complex scores, they're not your average 4/4 song for sure.
Yeah.
And, it's in a way, it's similar to the John Zorn sessions. Everything is written out they discuss a form ahead of time, and then they play it while looking at the score and look with one eye and looking at each other with the other eye. So that's how it goes on those sessions.
Sounds like a showdown at high noon.
Yes, it does.
All right, cool. So let's see what's new with you. I mean, that's just the first thing that jumped out at me. But there's lots of great stuff in the playlist, which I want to talk about. But what's happening with you recently? I think you mentioned that you had a cool Ramones tribute album coming up, something?
Yeah, that's the next thing I'm doing. So my last production was Steppendoom. I believe we talked about that in our previous episode. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So that came out last November, and I'm very happy with the way it came out. And the record label Magnetic Eye was very happy with the way it came out. So much so that they asked me whether I would, as Steppendoom, take part in one of their Redux compilations. So the Redux compilation by Magnetic Eye are a series of albums consisting of two CDs or two vinyls, where the first CD takes a band's first album and does it track by track, and the second CD or vinyl is a best of, so to speak. So they've done these with various artists like Black Sabbath and Pink Floyd and whatnot, and they were doing one about Soundgarden, and they asked me whether, as Steppendoom, I would consider doing a Steppendoom version of a soundtrack of a Soundgarden track, which was 4th of July, which happens to be one of my favorite songs, and also, in my opinion, one of the ones that lends itself best to a doom metal throat singing treatment, which is kind of what Steppendoom is.
Yeah, so cool, man, so amazing. Yeah. We did talk about that. That throat singing is just the coolest thing for that.
I think at the time, I'm blurry on the timeline, but I think when we last spoke, Steppendoom had just come out or was about to come out, but this Soundgarden thing had not come out yet. So for those who are interested, if you go to Magnetic Eye's website, you can hear the various versions of the soundtrack songs. And amongst those versions, there's the 4th of July version that I produced, which also, by the way, happens to feature Matt Cameron, who is the original and still drummer of Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. So I actually, through the help of Alan Johannes, who's one of my favorite musicians and who is also on the track playing ebow guitar, I was able to enlist Matt to play the drums. So basically, it was kind of funny and awkward in a way, because I asked Matt to play a song that he's played all his life, but to play it at about half the tempo that he usually would play it at. And he was down to do it, and he was happy with the results. And then we had Igor, who is a singer from Ukraine. We wanted to do, this was at the time the war in Ukraine had started, and we wanted to do something with a Ukrainian artist and to show support in that way. So Igor sang a song in his what used to be his studio, which was now had become his bomb bunker, which makes you think about what people have to go through life with. This guy had a studio which became the place where he was hiding out during the bombings. So yeah, it was, and then I enlisted two of the singers from the Steppendoom album, the throat singers. One was Albert Kuvetsin of Yatka, who just had a major feature because one of his songs was picked up by Apple for some major Apple commercial or something. I forget the exact details. And then we had Utelo, who is a French Paris-based throat singer. So I basically had two throat singers, Matt Cameron on drums, myself playing bass and producing, recording, and mixing, and Alan Johansson on ebow guitar and acoustic guitar, and Igor on regular vocals.
That's great. Where would you set up throat singers on a session like that? Do they just kind of get their own ISO booth for vocals, or do you?
Well, this was a session that was done all remotely because obviously Igor was in Ukraine. Yeah. Albert Kubetsin lives in Tuva. Utelo lives in Paris, and Matt Cameron lives in San Francisco, I believe. So all of that was done remotely, and then I just put it all together in New York.
Now, do you think of Tuva as the source for throat singing?
That's a loaded question. No, I mean, it's one of those things where Tuvans think they invented it, Mongolians think they invented it. So I'm just going to stay out of it. Let them fight that fight. I will say that, I think there's many countries actually, including Sardinia in Italy, where that tradition goes really, really, really back. And my attempt with Steppendoom was to showcase the various styles of throat singing around the world. I have some singers from Siberia. Throat singing is even exists in some of the countries in Africa. But although I couldn't find anyone from there to take part in the project. But it's in a lot of different places in the world. And so is
it something that you've practiced yourself?
No.
You've got a great voice for it, I would think.
No, I've never tried. I think it's not something you can just do. It requires years and years and years of training, and I don't think I have the time for that.
Yeah. I remember discovering Hunher too from Tuva back in the 90s, and I got to see them in New York.
Yeah.
At Town Hall once, and just blew me away, and really, really loved the sound of those records too. And actually did practice it and kind of crack the code a little bit on a long drive and sort of stumbled on the sound a little bit, but nothing that sounds genuine, just something that sounds like it's pointing in the right direction,
Yeah. Well, actually,
such a great sound.
It's funny you mentioned, because Albert Kubetsin, the guy I mentioned, who now goes by the name of Yatka, used to be one of the founding members of Hunur too. So it's possible that when you saw them in the 90s, you saw Albert with them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he left the band at some point, I forget when, and did his own thing under the name Yatka, but he was one of the founding members of Hunur too.
That's great. All right, well, let's see. What else is new for you? Are you joining us from the main studio or from your home studio now?
I'm in my home studio, but I got distracted telling you about Steppendoom and never answered your original question about the Ramones. So,
please do.
Yeah, so the reason why I brought up the Steppendoom and the Soundgarden is because that was the way my collaboration with Magnetic Eye took a turn in the direction of me producing their next Redux album, which was or is the Ramones one. So they were so happy with the Steppendoom rendition of the Soundgarden song 4th of July that they asked me whether I'd consider doing a whole record, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. So we agreed that I would take over the production of the Ramones Redux release, which will come out soon after this interview. It's for now it's tentatively scheduled for first or second quarter of 2024. So if everything goes well, April or May should be probably when it comes out. And the way I approach this is basically to take various artists and put them together with other artists, whether it's a singer or a guitar player or a whole other band, and create a collaboration where two bands or two artists do a duet or some sort of a way to collaborate on a Ramones song, so that it's not just a band playing a cover of the Ramones. And I'm more interested personally in doing versions that are different from the original, because I don't think it's it's not that interesting to just make a copy of something that already exists and it's perfect on its own. I'm more interested in reinterpretations where you can actually hear the style of the new band come through. So I've been listed a lot of bands. I recorded almost 30 tracks, and there's some great names in there. People like Dave Lombardo from, Slayer, Mr. Bungle, Empire State Bastards, and many other bands. There's Arthur Brown, there's Voivod, there's, speaking of Kilter, there's Kilter and Imperial Triumphant together. So that's a great example of a collaboration, because Imperial Triumphant and Kilter share the same drummer, Kenny Gorhowski. So I put the two bands together in the studio at EastSide Sound with two bass players, and we recorded this version of a Ramones song, which is completely different than the original, but shows a little bit of Imperial Triumphant and a little bit of Kilter. And there's many, many other bands, I could go on and on and on.
Well, it's cool. To hear you talk about doing it in a different style is cool. Cool way to think about it. I think about the Ramones, and I think stuff that comes to mind is, bass and drums always play the same thing. As part of a style.
Right.
I don't remember if the vocals are, typically doubled or not.
Not in the Ramones. There's a lot of choirs, like sing-alongs, but
yeah.
I wasn't trying in any way to mimic what the Ramones were doing. I was trying to pay homage to the Ramones by doing something new and something different and something that nobody has done before. That's the way I approached it. Because like I said, it's more interesting to me than just do, just do a copy of the original.
Yeah. Hey, Rockstar, come on over here. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars? Well, my secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, Declick, Declip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, and Limiting, all from iZotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off over at iZotope.com. So did you find yourself identifying things that would have been a copy and saying, let's not do it that way, let's steer away from it? Or was it not that? Was it just sort of intuitive to just go in a different direction?
It was my direction to the bands that I wanted to do something that's not. And not everyone followed the direction. There are some versions that are very similar to the original, and that's totally fine, There's a version of a song that we did with Sergio Milani of the Italian punk rock band called Kina, together with Raw Power, which is a legendary, still active Italian punk rock band. They've been around for 40 years making punk rock, so it's kind of hard for them to, step outside the punk rock, aesthetics and do something completely different. So in that sense, in that case, the version was pretty similar to the original, but that's fine.
Yeah. What about the process of doing a tribute record? It's such a fun way to bring all these artists together and do something that creates something that pays homage to a band that everybody loves, and then also, has the possibility of having people want to listen to it because it's bringing all these things together. Are there any things that you learned just about the simple mechanics or management of doing a compilation record? What are some, if it's fair to ask you this, what are some basic things about asking artists to record a piece? The music that you're covering is copyrighted, so there's some process about doing a cover album and putting it out. And is there anything about that process that can make something successful or not successful, or complicated for people, or simplified?
Yeah, the hardest part about the whole process is certainly the dealing with the managers and the rights clearance. I don't have to deal with the clearance of of the Ramones rights, because the label deals with that and, gets the proper licenses, makes sure that the Ramones estate gets paid. But I do have to have that conversation with the artists that want to take part in it. And, as always with any artist, and the more successful the artist, the more that is true, there's a manager hiding in the corner, rubbing his hands and trying to figure out how he can best profit from this for himself. Or, sure, they want to protect their artists, but I'm doing this for the love of music. And unfortunately, oftentimes the managers get in between the love that an artist has for a band like the Ramones and the ability of this happening at all. So there's definitely,
you just got to be patient, just sort through it.
Yeah, I mean, my way has always been direct contact with the artist whenever possible, because if you talk to an artist and the artist wants to do it, the artist will tell their managers that they want to do it, and the manager won't get in the way. But if you talk to the manager first, the chances of that not happening increase dramatically. And that's been the biggest struggle in this thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, so let's see other stuff, or is there anything more you would like to add about that record? That sounds like an awesome one. And it's going to be fun to hear.
It's going to be a fantastic album with a lot of very interesting versions and a lot of very interesting artists. And the only other thing I'll mention is, because Magnetic Eye is, a label that has a very strong footing in the metal scene, I needed to, of course, cater to their audience and make a record that has a strong footing in the metal scene. But I also wanted to represent the scene that has, I don't want to say created the Ramones. I should say that the Ramones created. So, the scene, the punk rock scene that's so vibrant and so alive to this day, has a lot of interesting artists in it. And so my attempt was to bring these artists into this compilation, and oftentimes, whenever possible, put them together with a quote unquote more metal artist, so that I can have a version that has a footing in the metal world, but also a footing in the punk rock world.
Yeah, I think that's a fun way to do it, just combining the right people.
Yeah. Combining the right people has been the name of the game for me. It's one of my favorite things to do as a producer. It's something that I've been doing for years, but I've observed Hal Wilner do for many years. He's been a strong inspiration for me and a mentor for me, having worked with him for 10 years. So, it's one of my favorite things to do, because when you put people together in the same room, new things happen that you wouldn't have anticipated or couldn't have anticipated. And that can only happen when those personalities are together.
What were some of the things in the process of recording this tribute record that were real easy to do or challenging? And so what about it involves, you in the studio with the band making all this stuff happen versus things that might be remote?
I mean, I try to do as much as possible with me present in the studio. That is my preference. It wasn't always possible because some artists are from far away. And, I tried whenever possible to invite them to do it in New York. If they lived anywhere near, or if they were coming through New York on tour, I tried to make it happen that way. And where possible, it did. For example, David J. of Bauhaus did a version when he was in town. And I put together a band for him specifically with Paul Wallfish, who was a member of Swans and Botanica, and Jim White on drums, and Johnny Polonsky on guitar. And, I put together a band, which is what I love to do, specifically for that. And David came to town, not specifically for that, but he happened to be there. So we built it around his presence in New York City. Like I said, where possible, I did that. When it wasn't possible, we just did it remotely. But everything, the entire record is being mixed in New York and by me. And so that's kind of the common denominator and the sound.
Now, are there any challenges to having such a variety of sessions and making them all glue together in the final mix or the final master?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or are there any things that help that glue together even better?
Well, I think the primary thing is that I'm the mixing engineer and producer on all of these tracks. So I will, I put my mark on it, my stamp on it in with the choices that I make mixing. So even though...
Meaning every session starts with excellent espresso.
Of course. But every session, even if it wasn't recorded at EastSide Sound by me, but it was recorded somewhere else, will go through my gear and my taste and my vision, and will have some version of my vision applied to it. And so I am the common denominator sound-wise. And then the final pass of mastering will also be another element of commonality between all the tracks. And Maur Appelbaum, who was the mastering engineer for Steppendoom, as well as for many great records like the Last Fate No More record, Yes, Judas Priest, etc., he's got ears of gold, and I really like working with him, and I like, the way he works with the sound. And so I asked him whether he'd be interested in mastering it. And so that's going to be another element of commonality, basically.
Yeah, Maur is great. He's been on the show before, and his discography is very impressive, and a lot of great sounding metal records, as I recall.
He has a way to deal with sound and talk about sound, which is unlike many other mastering engineers. So I appreciate working with him.
He's also taken some of his ideas to the next level and released his own plugin.
Yeah, absolutely.
For one of the pieces of gear that he built. So the oven, right?
Yeah, I use the oven on most of my productions, actually, as a final warming up stage on the master bus. But, in his case, when he's mastering, he's going to be using the hardware version of it, because the plugin is a software version of the hardware version. So that's the other thing about working with somebody like Maur, who knows sound so well and has so much excellent analog gear, is, you're going to get the true sound from the analog gear and not try to approximate it with the digital plugin version of it.
Sure. And for the rest of us, of course, the plugins are a lot of fun, and they do sound pretty amazing.
They sound fantastic, and they're on Plugin Alliance, so they're easy to get. Yeah.
So Rockstars, if you're curious about that one, go over to Plugin Alliance and check out the oven there.
And I should also mention the oven is one plugin of one hardware, but he's got another 3 or 4 hardware pieces that I don't believe exist as a plugin. So he's got the oven, and then he's got the roaster, and then he's got the microwave, whatever. I forget all the names, but he's got a funny way of naming all his gear that's all has to do with cooking, because that's what he's doing. He's cooking sound, making it warmer, making it delicious, making it better. So all the hardwares have names like that. And but I believe there's only one plug-in version of the oven.
That's great. Shout out to you, Maur. All right, cool. Well, anything else you'd like to add about the Ramones tribute record? Are you?
No, I don't want to give out too many details, because at the time of this interview, it's not finished yet. So, but look out for it. Check out Magnetic Eye. They're a fantastic label that do a lot of amazing releases. And I think you're all going to be very happy with what comes of it.
I probably asked you this before, but sometimes I like to just go in this direction on the podcast, talking about either an inspirational quote or a particular musician or producer that really inspires you. At this point in making records, is there anybody that just really, that you look to that really inspires you in the record making process?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many great producers that are way better at doing what they do than I could possibly ever aspire to be. Rick Rubin being one of my all-time favorite, and not because of his persona or his, the way he presents himself. What I really like about Rick Rubin is the way he was able to carve out a career that doesn't let genres be an obstacle to what he does. And that goes to the essence of and the core of the song without being distracted by all the bells and whistles. Those are two main aspects about his productions that I've always appreciated. Getting to the core and not letting genres define what he does or who he works with.
Yeah, I agree. And the story of, kind of starting out in the dorm room, doing the, being in the hip hop world, getting into the rock world, doing the, huge variety of records that include artists like Johnny Cash and sort of all sorts of artists I might also not even know yet. But I appreciate that. And then at the same time, like you said, I hear a lot of explaining the process of trying to let the music come forward in the record making process, so that I feel like it's a process of trying to let the unique voice of an artist or an album come forward. What are some things that you adopt? Do you think that my description is accurate towards that? And is any of that true to you in your process?
Yeah, the description is absolutely accurate, and I try to apply a lot of it to what I do as well. I mean, working with artists is always a delicate thing because there's a lot of personalities and sometimes egos at work, and you have to tread carefully and make sure that everyone's vision is heard and embodied and respected. And at the same time, if you're the producer, try to gently apply your vision to theirs and find a common denominator or a point of intersection between their vision and yours, so that everyone in the end feels proud and represented by the work that's being created.
Are there any stories that come to mind for you of that process recently or in the past? Or do you think of, like, is there a way that you might typically approach a record and have conversations around it? And is there sort of a structure to the work day that allows for that kind of communication?
Not something, there's not a specific formula. I just get into the studio and prepare for whatever it is that I'm doing that day, so that there's no being slowed down or there's nothing that becomes a downer for what we're doing. I don't want to have to tell them to wait when they're inspired. I don't want to have to tell them to, that I need to set something up differently. I'm preparing for all the eventualities so that we can just get down to record, get down to business. So I've talked about this before, the importance of preparation. So I don't need to repeat myself on that, but that's very important aspect to me, to making sure everything goes smooth.
Whatever the moment is, being prepared for it, whether it's mixing or recording. So Rockstars, we'll have links to Marc's website and also over to EastSide Sound. And there's just some great little clips of you on your Instagram sort of showing up at the studio before the John Zorn session and turning everything on and getting everything ready. And it just reminded me of that's kind of a nice moment as engineers and producers too, that quiet moment before everybody arrives.
Yeah, the quiet before the storm. I'm glad you appreciate those videos. I usually take them on the second day of a multi-day session where everything is already set up and tested and working. So it's just a matter of turning on lights and amps and air conditioning and headphone system. But it's always a good way to showcase what the artists are using in terms of instruments and what I am using in terms of microphone. Obviously, being such a huge microphone fanatic, for those who follow me on social media, it's always interesting to see what crazy vintage microphone I might be using on a certain session.
Anything you're excited about today?
Well, yes, I just returned from France, where I made a large deal, large microphone acquisition from a collector who is selling off his entire incredible collection of microphones. So I picked some of my favorite ones from there, and I came back with a suitcase that was way, way, way heavier than the airline would have wanted me to carry.
I'm sure security loved that. I remember getting stopped going through the airport when I had my Earthworks mics in a suitcase, and they were like, "We are this close to calling the National Guard."
Yes, 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 it's true. I still have some JZ BT201 microphones that have a similar shape to the Earthworks.
Right.
They kind of look like a missile, or a very, very big ammunition for a very big gun. And I remember carrying those to New Orleans to record U2. I used them on acoustic guitar for The Edge, and I had a similar thing happen at TSA. This time around, it was the same thing. I was leaving from Europe, and they looked at it very, very closely, and I had them very carefully packaged with bubble wrap, and I had to take them all out and and then repackage them carefully so they all fit. And it was kind of a mess, but I knew it was going to happen, so I just went to the airport a little ahead of time.
Now, how did those mics sound? I was always curious about those particular ones, but I never have used them yet.
Which ones are you referring to?
Those are the small diaphragm, sort of cylindrical mics.
Oh, you're talking about the JZBT201s? The JZBT201s are out of production now. They had a body like an Earthworks, but then instead of being a small diaphragm, they had a large diaphragm at the end. And the interesting design about those mics is that they're a magnetic capsule, so you could easily remove it and replace it with a different capsule and effortlessly go from an omni to a cardioid to hypercardioid capsule in just snapping the new thing in place, the new capsule in place.
Yeah. Maybe mute the track first.
Yeah, of course.
So you just pop it off and it just magnetically sticks on. That's cool.
Exactly.
Sometimes with those small diaphragm mics, it's a little tricky threading the capsules onto the microphone. So that's pretty.
Yeah. So clever. Here you don't have any threading. But like I said, they're a large diaphragm, not a small diaphragm.
I'm sorry.
That's the beauty of that mic, is that it has a small body but a large diaphragm capsule.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, but they're out of production, so Rockstars, you're out of luck on that one. But you can.
It does look like they have the BT202 stereo pair listed.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's a new. I wasn't aware of that. Maybe there's a new. There's a new thing. Oh, yeah, BT202, I just Googled it. Yeah, it looks exactly like that. So you can see the shape of the body I was referring to, like a small missile. And then the
end firing microphone, right? Like you use the end of the microphone.
Yes,
as the
absolutely,
capsule.
Absolutely, yeah.
Look, if you're like me, then you love having cool instruments in your studio, right? No matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio all the instruments and sounds you need. From drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then adding awesome overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Use the code ROCK10 now to get 10% off, or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples, all over at nativeinstruments.com. So what else is new at the studio there for you?
Well, the biggest news since last time we spoke is that the studio has been acquired by a new owner. His name is Andres Pollack, and he's a Chilean film composer. And he bought the studio from the original owner and founder, Lou Holtzman, about a year ago now, or maybe a year and a half by the time this interview will be on air. Andres is a wonderful musician and a very dedicated studio owner. He's the perfect studio owner for a place like EastSide Sound, because EastSide Sound is now the oldest studio in New York. It's been in existence for over 50 years, because Lou Holtzman originally started it in 1969, went onto the books in 1972. So, we predate every other studio in New York City,
Wow.
including Electric Lady, which went onto the books, in 69 or 70 or something like that. And Andres really, really appreciates the history of New York City's music and the history of jazz. And so he is the perfect owner to take this studio into the future. He's a little bit younger than Lou Holtzman, the original owner. So he's got the stamina and interest and excitement that you need to have as studio owner in New York City to deal with all the bullshit that you have to deal with in New York City. He's the right person for the job, and I'm very excited to work with him and to take the studio into the future for another 20, 30 years or whatever the future will hold.
That's amazing. Where is the studio located? It's in Manhattan on the east side?
Correct. It's in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which is, an area that was originally very active musically. In the 90s, there were a lot of music venues, like the Living Room, founded by the founder of the Magic Shop, another great studio that existed in Soho. There were a lot of places in the 90s when I joined EastSide Sound, but EastSide's been there since the 70s. And in the early 70s, Lou Holtzman, the original owner, always tells me the story of how he wouldn't even leave the house without a gun. He always needed to pack protection because it was such a drug-ridden neighborhood. And the musicians, Lou tells me the story of how all the studios were in Midtown, in the 40s, 48. 48 famously had a lot of recording studios like Avatar, et cetera. And the musicians were very afraid to come down to the Lower East Side to record. He had to kind of convince them to come and try it out. So it's a very, very, very different scene than now. Now it's completely yuppified and coffee shops and blah, blah, blah. So it's
right.
It's a different time.
Well, there's something to be said for taking a risk when you start your studio. A lot of times I think for those of us who might want to start a studio, even if it's a home studio, sometimes because you're entering this as an artist, you inevitably might look for an inexpensive house or an inexpensive commercial space. And I guess if you've got like you said, the stamina and the vision, and you can stay true for long enough, the neighborhood may just sort of catch up to you.
Yeah.
And your studio.
Well, Lou was a visionary in that sense, but also he's an original Lower East Sider in the sense that his family was born in the Lower East Side, or he was born in the Lower East Side. His family were immigrants, but his mom had a store on Orchard Street that was selling handkerchiefs. And so, his history on the Lower East Side runs very deep and very, very much into the past. I don't remember when his mom's store opened, but I know that he started the studio in his family building in 69.
Right on. And then you guys have a Neve console there. It's a very beautiful looking studio. It doesn't necessarily look like a very old studio or anything. When you look at the photos, it looks very modernized and kept up, and
we take good care of it. But also I should say the location that we're in now is not 50 years old, because we moved locations about 22 years ago. So the pictures you've seen and what the studio looks like now is 20 years old basically. But we do take good care of it, clean it, do everything so it doesn't look run down. And we try to maintain it so that everything works. We don't want to have one of these studios where you go in and half of the things that are there don't actually work. So
that is one of the challenges of studios, especially when, well, I want to say especially when you mix and match vintage gear with modern stuff, but honestly, even the modern stuff, it's amazing how quickly our tools become vintage, right?
Yeah. Well, we have some real vintage things in there. We have a bunch of MPEG 351s and MPEG 600s. And then we have modern things like Shadow Hills. We have vintage Neves and modern Neves. The console, as you mentioned, is a Neve Genesis, which is a relatively modern / vintage console in the sense that it's about 20 years old. So it's a fully analog console with no AD or DAs. The sound always stays analog. There's no digital, signal processing going on, but it does have a DAW control layer, which allows you to do fader automation or mute automation, or even control a plugin from a knob on the console, so you don't have to constantly use the mouse. So in that sense, and in many other ways, EastSide Sound is the perfect symbiosis of vintage and modern. We have vintage equipment with analog signal path, but the ability to control digitally, do a recall of a mix, do automation on Pro Tools, etc., etc. It's a very good meeting point of the two eras and the two worlds.
So can you describe some of your workflow where you find it's useful to stay in the analog, but use the console to control Pro Tools? Like what's an example in a moment where you might, and do you have to switch the console from one mode to the other momentarily, or how does that?
Basically when I record, I stay analog. I don't even use the DAW layer at all. So I just record. We have a ton of preamps at EastSide Sound. So if you want to, you can do an entire session without using Neve preamps. But why would you? Is, my question. If you have 32 Neve preamps, why not use those? So personally, other engineers do it differently, but I personally run all my signals through the through the Neve preamps, which are basically 1081s. And then I stay analog and I move the faders on the console during the recording session, and I never go to the DAW layer. When I mix, I then turn on the DA. First, I get my main mix on the analog layer, and then I go to the digital layer, to the DAW layer, which, I'm calling it digital, but it's not digital. Nothing is getting converted. It's simply a way for me to see a fader move on the console when I move the volume in Pro Tools, or vice versa, move a fader on the console and see that track go down, the track volume go down in Pro Tools.
I see. So it's not like you're not getting a double fader response. You're not getting a level change in Pro Tools plus a level change at the analog console.
No,
it's more like
you're not. You're only controlling Pro Tools. Of course, that means that if you are using outboard, let's say you're using an outboard compressor, obviously if you're sending less from Pro Tools and therefore less audio is coming into the console, less audio will be hitting your outboard compressor, and therefore the compressor, threshold might not be met, or, you'll have a different attenuation of the system. But other than when you're using outboard, nothing is changing in the response. You don't have two gain stages. The stage is only one, the faders, and then I do my volume automation in Pro Tools so that I can recall a mix more easily.
Yeah. Now, when you're tracking, are the musicians hearing their sounds go through the console, go through Pro Tools, and then come back to the headphones? Or do you sort of hear everything straight analog through the console out to the recording session, and Pro Tools is recording on the sidelines? In other words, do you find that the sound of an analog console with no digital conversion in there whatsoever is preferable in a tracking session for, not having latency, or just having a pure analog sound come through to the headphones?
Yes and no, in the sense that I don't I don't really send through the console before I send to the artist. I send directly from Pro Tools, partly to avoid any kind of latency, but most importantly to make sure that they have the most direct thing, and anything I do on the console does not affect their volume in the headphones. You don't want to be doing like hitting a solo button or turning down a fader and suddenly their volume in the headphones changes. You want to do everything pre-fader and as close to the source as possible, and the source being the signal recorded in Pro Tools is the closest way to tap in and send that. That said, I'm almost ashamed to say the headphone system we currently use is a Behringer system that runs audio over Ethernet. And so, everything we've said kind of, goes to the wayside because the signal is becoming digital and transmitted over Ethernet strictly only for the headphone system. So the headphone monitoring is not the most high fidelity, but it's only for headphones. Everything, it doesn't matter as much because everything depends on the type of headphones that the musicians use. Some bring their own, some use the stock ones we have in the studio, blah, blah, blah. So it's not as important. And I will also say that even though we currently have this Behringer system, we are about to switch to a new, much more high-end headphone system. The Behringer,
that's cool.
Yeah, the Behringer system, we originally had the Mytek system, the Private Q, which is a beautiful, great sounding analog headphone system. Because it's analog, it also had a bunch of hums all the time. Musicians were always complaining about, oh, my track has a hum, or this has a buzz, things like that. Things that were hard to troubleshoot. So it became such a recurring problem that we decided to switch to an easier system. And the Behringer was at the time what was recommended and what most studios were using. So we kind of, jumped on that cart and got the Behringer. Now with the new owner, because he has such a dedication for quality and for good gear, and because he had a studio in Chile that he closed, he's shipping all his equipment from the old studio in Chile to New York and integrating it into the present-day EastSide Sound. One of those pieces of gear is this more advanced sounding headphone system, which we will install in the coming months. In fact, by the time this interview goes online, we might have it up and running.
That's very cool. Well, is it going to be an analog one, or is it digital, or just?
It's still audio over Ethernet because that's the way most of these systems work, and also because EastSide Sound has all these isoboots. We have 6 isoboots plus a live room. It would be hard to rewire them all for a proprietary system. So since we already have Cat 6 runs everywhere, it's easier to go to one of those systems.
Well, it's cool to hear. I love hearing, a story when you say, oh, we have, the Behringer boxes for headphones, because the music that you're making there is clearly advanced music, and there's clearly some advanced playing. And if that has worked, then it's very encouraging to those of us who, might be looking for a system for our home studio or whatever. Now, did you find that working with artists, they like to have control over their own mix, or do you sort of dial it in mostly with the pre-fader sends and then just give them, a knob for a little more of themselves if they want?
No, I mean, I always give them pre-fader sends of everything, but I let them do their own mix. And if they need help, of course, I will go to the control room and make a mix for them. But usually, if you start at 0 dB, you're in a pretty good starting point. Everyone wants to hear things differently. So by the time, a drummer gets a mix together, he might not want to hear any drums in the headphones because he's hearing drums in the live room.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody else might want to hear more of their instrument. So, it doesn't really make sense for me to make mixes for them. It's better that they make them unless they have a hard time doing so.
The S-Series by Atom Audio, crafted in Berlin, is a flagship line of reference monitors, blending advanced engineering and in-house design. With 5 models in various sizes and configurations, these monitors build on Atom Audio's iconic heritage while incorporating new technology for improved acoustic performance. The range includes the compact S2V with the 7-inch woofer, the 3-way S3H with twin 7-inch woofers, the vertical S3V with a single 9-inch woofer, and the powerful S5H and S5V main monitors featuring a 12-inch woofer and exceeding 131 dBSPL per pair. Despite differences in size and power, all these models provide highly analytical sound for professional audio applications. The S-Series includes new woofers, mid-range drivers, redesigned waveguides, and a DSP engine for crossover optimization. The result is accurate frequency response, consistent dispersion, enhanced detail in bass and mid frequencies with wider frequency ranges, and forward-looking digital connectivity, all in a durable design. The S-Series ensures longevity in your studio, backed with a 5-year guarantee at atomaudio.com. I am massively impressed with iZotope Ozone. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The Mastering Assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need for a professional result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like Clarity, Impact, Low-End Focus, Stabilizer, Imager, Exciter, and Spectral Shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You simply adjust the settings to your own taste, and it sounds incredible. And the magic of Master Rebalance means you can reach into your mix at the mastering stage and manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now, when I send off the masters for approval and get comments back like, "Holy bleep, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, you're a wizard, finally I love my singing, and the drums and bass sound huge," well then I know I'm doing something right. So check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great apps at iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Marc Urselli, joining us from New York. And we're going to jump in and keep talking about making great records, including Marc's own music. Marc, you ready to kick it off?
Absolutely, always ready.
All right, cool, man. So now one of the things that I noticed in your playlist is your name listed as the artist in collaborations. Dawn Moonglow, Morel, Crash and Burn. How do you pronounce that? Hogre or Hoger?
Oh, that album is an album that I made with Vince Pastano, or Pastano, who is a guitar player from Italy. We went to school together. He's one of my best friends, and he has been able to create the most amazing career for himself in Italy. He plays with a rock star called Vasco Rossi, who, I'm sure nobody in the US knows, but to give you an example of how big this guy is, he's basically the Bruce Springsteen of Italy. When this guy plays, he will sell out 5 stadiums in a row in the same city. And I'm talking stadiums with 70,000 people in it. He's an actual, he's as big a rock star as they come. And in fact, he also owns, or I don't know if owns is the word, but has claimed the record for the biggest ever ticketed show in history. So if you look him up on Wikipedia, Vasco Rossi, spelled Vasco, and the last name is Rossi, Rossi, you will find this. He did this concert like 3 or 4 years ago in Modena, a city in Italy. And I think there were 250,000 tickets sold in a week or something like that. And that is the record in the Guinness World of Records. There have been bigger concerts, but they were free. But that's the biggest ticketed concert ever. And my friend
Wow.
Vince is, or Vince, as you would say in English, is his producer, musical director, and guitar player. And Vince and I made this record together called Hakel Tribulation. It's already a while ago. That was, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. It's called Past the Mark.
And so what's your instrument? You're playing guitar, yeah?
No, he plays guitar. He's the guitar player, and I was doing everything else. It's an electronic rock record, so everything, all the drums and synths and bass lines are all programmed and played by me, and then he played guitar on top, yeah.
And I remember we probably talked about this before, but is keyboards and kind of the digital production, that's your primary instrument?
Yeah, I mean, I have studied piano when I was a kid, so that's the only thing that I know how to play a little bit. But then I've learned to play other instruments, not very well. I'm not going to claim that I am a good musician or a good bass player or a good drummer. But on Steppendoom, I play drums and bass. And on these two albums that I made with Jim Jarmusch and Lee Ranaldo and Balazs Pandey, I played bass in some keys. So, I can get around some instruments, but I'm not a very good musician. I'm around so many great musicians that I know what my limitations are, and I'm not going to try and call myself a musician.
Well, it's nice when we have the power of being able to record and edit ourselves.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've definitely edited the shit out of my drum tracks on Steppendoom. I'm not that good a drummer.
Right on. What about Morel? That was one of the records in your playlist. That really sounds great. It was, let's see, what was the title? I think the title is Morel as well. It says Marc Urselli remix.
Oh, that's a remix. Yeah. That's a remix I did for an artist from Vermont. It's Elayo is her name, Ellayo. So she played all the instruments on that. I just added some strings, and I did an electronic remix.
Is mixing? I forgot if we talked about Atmos and immersive mixing. Is that a direction that you're going as well? And is there any of that topic that might be interesting to you?
I have not delved into the Atmos world yet. I would very much like to do so. I sense the strong pull that it has on me, and I'm very interested in immersive audio because I've already been dabbling in immersive live sound, and I have mixed some 5.1 film scores. So I'm not new to the immersive world, but I just haven't been able to do the jump into Atmos just yet. Partially because it needs a proper Atmos designed spec room. And we haven't, although there's been talk about doing that at EastSide, we haven't gone there yet. And we haven't honestly gotten enough requests for it yet. And it's possible that if we were to build out an Atmos room, the requests would come in. But so far, I've only had like 2 requests for Atmos mixes. So,
what is immersive live sound? How do you describe what that is?
It's basically live sound with multiple speakers and directionalities. There's various systems. L Acoustics, who's a French brand, has a system called ELISA that allows for immersive audio, multi-channel immersive audio. There's also a DMB system called Soundscapes, which I've used on an electronic music festival that I mixed in London, which was a lot of fun. It's basically object-oriented mixing, where you can move objects around in the room, usually in a circular fashion, but in some instances, there's also height speakers. And then a most recent production that I did was at the Armory in New York, which is a gigantic space with a huge reverb tail. And I did a production there that I was the sound designer of for the composer Tyshawn Sorey, who was recently nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and the theater director Peter Sellers. The production was called Monochromatic Light and consisted of a small ensemble of piano, violin, percussion, and a 20-piece choir, plus a singer and some dancers. And it was built, I encourage you to Google it because it's hard to describe, but it was built as a circular stage with circular seating, and then a circular platform around the seating, which then had I believe it was an octagon, 8 sides, and it had 8 paintings by Julie Meretu, who's a world famous painter with retrospectives at MoMA and the Whitney, etc., etc. And behind all of these, so I designed a center stack of speakers that was irradiating sounds in all the direction except the choir to avoid feedback. So all the audience members were covered. And then I also spec'd speakers to be behind those paintings so that I could send sound out of the paintings from the various sides of the hexagon or octagon. I forget now if it was 6 or 8 sides. And because at one point during the second part of the show, the singer walks around that elevated circular platform, what I was doing is I was using those speakers behind the paintings to localize the sound of the singer to the painting he was standing in front of. So I would basically turn up the speaker of the painting he was standing in front of when he was in front of that painting. Then he moved to the next, and I would bring down that fader and bring up the other fader so that the sound followed him. And you always got this sense of directionality and localization across the whole show.
That's great. That's a good example of setting up your mix where your fader that's on the left and you look up is going to be the speaker on the left, and not messing that stuff up and, mixing and matches and where your faders are, because you don't want to turn up the wrong one.
Absolutely.
That also reminds me of an exhibit that was traveling through the art museum here in Nashville, and I think toured, and it might have been a Swedish artist or something like that, Norwegian. And there was just, you walked through and each video screen was a different camera in some big house, and it was an art project. And as you walked up to that screen, you could hear that instrument playing as it was recorded. And I just love those concept pieces like that.
Who was the artist? Do you remember?
I don't remember. No, it was years ago that
curious.
I saw it. I might be able to find it.
No, I was just curious.
Well, I mean, it just reminds us of how, mixing in stereo or mixing in mono and creating records as we do is awesome. It's wonderful. But like the format that we use becomes tied to some sort of technical, constant that is going to be mirrored in a studio setting and mirrored as the consumer listens to it. But when you remove that and you start thinking about music as performance, then, anything goes, and you can create an entire listening back system that you can perform in as well. It's just pretty cool. And it's exciting, what's possible in music.
By the way, I should mention that if anyone wants to read more about that sound design I mentioned for Monochromatic Light, in the June issue of Recording Magazine, which is a magazine I've been writing for about 3 years, I wrote an article about immersive audio in the live world. So you can check that out. And what I basically talked about here is described in further detail there.
Okay, cool. Maybe we can add that link in the show notes for you rock stars too. All right. Well, so going back to Morel for just a moment, and you brought up the concept of reverb and natural reverb tail in the space, but also that particular remix had a great combination of, huge ambient reverbs, synthesizers, light, detailed violins and things like that. And I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about things that help you combine all these things that are both real and totally unreal in making music when you're mixing. Are there places where incorporating all these incredible effects that we have available to us are going to kind of destroy our mix? And are there ways that you handle that to make sure that it comes across?
Well, like the famous quote goes, with great power comes great responsibility. So you have the tools. It's up to you how to use them and to not use them. I'm a big fan of using effects, but they have to serve the song. Anything you do as a producer and engineer needs to always serve the song, in my opinion. So, in the case of remixing, which is something I really love to do, you can get really creative and you can kind of deconstruct a previously constructed track and rebuild it differently and add all your layers of instrumentations. And in this case, I added violins by Alicia Smetana, but I added tons of reverbs and delays and things like that to make it a more, in a way, you could say a more Nine Inch Nails kind of production for a song that was something different originally. But I love doing remixes, The Italian artist I mentioned earlier, Vasco Rossi, that my friend plays with, I'm doing a remix for him right now. I'm not supposed to talk about it now, but because this podcast will come out months from now, I can mention that because by that time it might be out. And so, in that sense, for example, I'm doing a remix of a song that's 40 years old. So I got tracks from that were transferred from tape to Pro Tools, and that had, stuff that sounded like it was 40 years old. And my job was to deconstruct it and reconstruct it in a more modern way, preserving, of course, the vocals and preserving the main elements of the song, but giving it a different, modernized vibe. And I love doing that kind of work because remix work really allows you to be creative and doesn't let the existing tracks that make up the song limit you in what you can do.
What are some tips for us if we want to explore the concept of remixing? What do you want to start with when you're remixing? Do you want all the individual multi-tracks for something, or do you want stems for something? Is remixing often a question of let's just have the vocal only and rethink the whole production? What's some thoughts that would help us consider this ourselves?
I mean, to me, having the multi-track is the ultimate goal. Anything else is a compromise. If you can have the multi-track, you'll have the most amount of freedom. Because also the other thing that's great about remixing is that you get to hear things or mixing things that weren't part of the original production. Sometimes you had tracks that were not used or were kept in the background, and so now you can suddenly shine new lights on these parts that had been forgotten by history and make a whole new version with parts that were obfuscated by other parts. So having the multi-track allows you for that. The next best thing is having stems, and only in the last scenario I would start from just a vocal and rebuild the whole song.
Okay, cool. And then do you find that it's the most effective way to approach a remix is to think about really making changes to it? Or do you find that sometimes just making subtle changes it enough to feel like a really effective remix?
No, to me, the most interesting remixes are the ones that are the furthest away from the original. For me to just make a, if you're just going to make something that's slightly different than the original, then it's not really a remix. It's just a different version of the same. But to me, just like I explained for the Ramones tribute that I'm producing, it's more interesting to hear the artistry of the artist that's doing the remix in this case, or the Ramones cover in that case. It's more interesting to hear that. So if I hear say a Nine Inch Nail remix of a Johnny Cash song, I want to hear Nine Inch Nails. I don't want to just hear Johnny Cash, because it made no sense. And I can listen to Johnny Cash,
Yeah. Now, what about tempo changes? How common do you think it is to change the tempo?
Oh, it's very common, especially if you're going in a dance direction. Like in this remix that I mentioned for the Rockstar in Italy, the original was at 113, and the first direction I got was that it needed to be faster, and so we settled on 120. So the first part of the job was to do the best beat detective, time compression, time stretching, whatever needed to be done to bring it to 120.
Why is 120 the tempo that every session shows up at automatically? Why is that the default tempo?
I don't know why.
Anything about that?
No, I don't know why it's the default tempo. I mean, obviously, you could argue that some people would argue that it's a multiplier of your average heartbeat. I don't know if there's any truth to that.
I think resting heart rate is about 60.
Right. So 120 is in sync with your body, and I've heard that version before, and I've heard arguments for that. Whether the makers of Avid actually thought about that when assigning 120 as the default tempo, I don't know. You had to set up something, and I think 120 is somewhere in the middle between, I think maybe 240 is the fastest you can set your Pro Tools to. I'm not 100% sure about that, but so it's probably a middle ground.
I think I remember Frank Zappa once joking about, if you want your song to be a hit, make sure it's 120 beats per minute.
That's possible, yeah.
So who knows? Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe 120 represents double the resting heart rate. Your heart is sort of like pulse out, pulse in. So
yeah.
Maybe that's double, and that therefore anything slower feels down tempo, and anything above that feels up tempo.
It's possible. I mean, 120 is a good average tempo if you want to bob your head to a song, which is what the instructions were for this remix I'm doing. They said we need to have people bobbing their heads to it. So
that's great. All right. Well, so let's see. Another record that's in your playlist that struck me are the pieces that you're doing with Bill Frisell. Strata, Sweet Earth was an example. Beautiful guitar playing, sort of slower tempo, artistic jazz, expressive music. And I wondered if you want to just talk a little bit about, Bill Frisell walks into your studio and you're like, wow, this is a great player. Now I got to choose a microphone for this guitar. What's some of the stuff that goes through your process of choosing guitar mics when you're working with an electric guitarist who is, really got a distinct style and music?
Well, it's much easier than you think. First of all, I should mention that the record you mentioned, which is Strata by Bill Frisell and Schoolies Ferrison, is not a record I played on. I simply recorded and mixed it. It came out on a label called Nouvelle, which does primarily jazz albums. Straight ahead jazz albums for the most part, and primarily vinyl only releases. But this is one of the rare cases where they also luckily decided to put it out digitally, so anyone can hear it on my playlist or on Spotify in its entirety. It's a gorgeous record and one of my favorite records ever to have worked on, simply because Schoolie and Bill are two of my favorite musicians. And I could talk endlessly about their musical qualities and their human qualities, because they're both such wonderful human beings, as soft-spoken as they come. I think they have a unofficial race between them in who can say less with less words or more softer. So I remember about that record how almost
I'll remember that before I invite Bill Frisell to be and Schoolie to be on the podcast.
Yes, yeah.
And have to talk for 2 hours, right?
Oh yeah, they have a lot. They can express emotions through music in ways few other people can. But yeah. I remember what was funny about that session is that the two of them are so quiet. And there's a video on YouTube, by the way, of one song, so you can see the setup for the session. They would do a take, and then each of them was in this awkward silence, waiting for the other person to say something first. And so after every take, there were these extended, awkward silences that were really, really strange, but wonderful and loaded with art, with the artistic expression of silence. But anyway, beautiful record. And to answer your question, the setup is way easier than you could have thought, because Scully was playing an acoustic bass, meaning not an upright, but like a guitar-shaped 4-string bass. And Bill was playing an electric guitar. So I don't remember the exact models, but I'm pretty sure I just had a 57 in front of the guitar amp, because you can't go wrong with a 57 ever. And then I believe I had a Bayer Dynamic in front of the bass, and I might have had one other mic as a room mic between them, but it was very minimal. There weren't very many microphones involved. I've made many, many records with Bill Frisell, probably about 20, more or less 20. And most of the records that I made with Bill, there was one mic on him. If he was playing electric, it's usually either a 57 on the guitar amp or a combination of a 57 and a Royer R121. And if he was playing acoustic guitar, which I've done many records of him playing acoustic guitar together with Julian Lage and Gian Riley, then I usually use Erland EHR-M microphones, which are these beautiful triangular-shaped diaphragm microphones from Sweden. The company's called Erland. I love their mics for acoustic music, and that's become the microphone that has made those records. And we made about a dozen maybe records with that trio, or a combination of those three musicians. They're all John Zorn music, so you can now, this is new, as of a month ago, you can listen to them online, because John Zorn for the longest time was very much against streaming, so his catalog was never available. Now, suddenly, a month ago, he's changed his mind, and so my Spotify discography has increased by 120-fold overnight, because all these records I made with Zorn are now available online. So if you go and on Spotify look for John Zorn or Bill Frisell, any record in the last 10 years that has Bill Frisell on it was made by me at EastSide Sound. And in fact,
all right, we might have to add those to your playlist. I don't think we have those ones.
Yeah, I think I'd mentioned it because this is a relatively new thing of like literally. But how do you add it? Literally, Zadek, which is the label by John Zorn, literally offloaded their catalog to Spotify. So overnight, there were 900 new records added. About 120 of those are recorded, and mixed by me.
Amazing.
But it's a huge discography. And I've worked, actually, it's interesting. I was just interviewed last week by Bob Krasner for a magazine called AM New York, which is there's an online version of it, but it also is distributed every morning in the New York City subway as a tabloid newspaper. He interviewed me, and he's a Bill Frisell fan, so he asked me about whether he could get a quote from Bill Frisell about working with me. If you're not opposed to it, I'll read it to you, because I was very touched by what Bill wrote.
Absolutely.
So I sent an email to Bill, and I said, this guy wants to get a quote from you for an article he's writing about me and EastSide Sound, which I can send you if you want. I can send you the article later. But Bill wrote, "It has been my great pleasure to know and work with my friend Marc Urselli. By now, I've lost track of how many recording projects we've done together. There must be at least 20, and still more to come. He's a musician with extraordinary instincts. He listens, full attention. He's in there in the moment. Often it seems as if he's actually there before the moment. There have been so many times where I've said, 'Mark, do you think you could... ... Before I'd even finished the sentence, he had anticipated what I was about to ask and completed the task. He's so fast. I can concentrate on just playing. There's never any waiting around wondering if the tape is rolling. The process of recording becomes transparent. Marc clears the way so that nothing gets in the way of the music. I'm looking forward to the next one. So that's
amazing.
Beautiful quote that really touched me, deep in my heart, because it means that what I'm doing is working not just for the listeners, but also for the artists, which obviously I care very much about.
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music we are creating to the style that we want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments' complete bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and then adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's a great way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com. Well, it's so crucial, that concept of trying to make the recording process transparent to the musicians. As somebody who occasionally steps out and plays as a musician on sessions in my studio, I've really learned that. I mean, I'm particularly fragile when I pick up a guitar and I'm about to record. So anything that sort of, punches a hole in that concentration when I'm trying to just focus on the next, on performing, really has a negative effect, and I really appreciate it.
If you have been on both sides of the glass, so to speak, then you know what it means,
Yeah. And you've put yourself on the other side of the glass performing as well, or do you find that when you're playing, you're actually in the control room doing your contributions? Well, you said you're playing drums too.
Yeah, I'm very seldom on the other side of the glass. When I am, it's usually either for a project of mine with nobody around. So, for example, I remember recording those drum tracks for Steppendoom. I did them on Christmas. I'm not a particularly, Christmas festive guy. I'm quite the Grinch, actually. And so while everyone was at home with their families, that's when I went to the studio because I knew nobody would be around. And I'm kind of ashamed of, me playing my drum playing. So I set up Pro Tools with my laptop, meaning I set up screen sharing on my laptop so that I could control Pro Tools in the control room. And that way I could press record and just do a take and do multiple takes and whatnot until I was happy. In other instances, like when I did the record with Jim Jarmusch, Lee Ronaldo, and Balazs Pandey, I first stayed in the control room and got levels for everyone, making sure everything was perfectly sounding. And then I had my assistant be there to press record and just monitor the levels to make sure nothing was distorting. But I went on to the other side of the glass knowing that everything was already taken care of, basically.
Yeah, the laptop trick is such a great one. And I remember way back, it was very complicated. You had to get like the Timbuktu app and install it on a laptop and try and get it to work over Wi-Fi or an Ethernet cable. But now it's just so easy with what I found that's really helpful is if you can find an old used MacBook Air, they're very light and the batteries last forever and they're cheap, and all you have to do is just connect it to the studio computer and then turn on the built-in screen sharing and voila, you're controlling the studio computer.
Screen sharing is a wonderful thing. And the other trick for the rock stars on your podcast, if you're not on Mac, which you should be, but if you're not on Mac, you can also use Google's, I think it's called Chromecast or something like that, screen sharing. So it basically works through Chrome. So you don't need to you can control a PC from a Mac and vice versa because it goes through Chrome. And that's a wonderful trick that you can also employ for that.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Just maybe keep your studio recording computer and your personal banking computer separate so you don't mix the two up.
Oh, yeah. For me, everything is very separate, The studio computer has nothing on there that's... Because you also want to make sure that everything runs smoothly and nothing is suddenly not working because of some background updating process or whatever,
Yeah.
Can't afford that in the studio.
Totally. All right. Well, so if we're talking about drums for a little bit, do you want to talk about some of the ways that you like to record drums and or mix them? Anything that is part of your sort of drum mixing template when you're, or maybe that particular one, maybe the Steppendoom stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's not rocket science, really. I mean, I use a bunch. I'll tell you some of my favorite mics. My favorite kick drum mic has become the DTP 640 RX by Hewitt. So what's cool about that microphone is that it has a dual element, meaning it has a condenser, small diaphragm condenser, and a dynamic, and they're side by side, so they're perfectly in phase, which is always a problem when recording a low instrument like the kick drum. It's a relatively inexpensive microphone. It's less than $400, and it's become my go-to kick drum microphone because you have the two elements. They don't get mixed together. You get two XLR out, so you record it onto two tracks. So you have the dynamic track and the condenser track, and you can either mix them together to get the perfect blend of oomph and attack, or you can choose which one to use. So oftentimes, if I'm doing a metal record, I rely more on the condenser because it's got a more pointy attack. If I'm doing a jazz record, I rely more on the dynamic. And oftentimes, this also changes from song to song, meaning if I'll record the whole record with that microphone, but then on the ballad, I will only use the dynamic, for example. And on the louder rock sections, I might suddenly blend in the condenser.
So a couple of questions. That particular mic also has, I can't remember if it has a pad switch on it, but it's got sort of an EQ selection. You can make it have a little bit more of a scoop like a D112 microphone or B flat and those sort of things. So do you find those to be useful or do you find that you're constantly switching them, or more like you got something and that's worked and it just stays there? And then the other part of the question is, with that particular mic, do you like to position it in a certain location on a kick drum?
So I think those settings are really interesting and really useful. Personally, I don't really use them very much because I like to record everything flat and then apply whatever EQ later rather than try to EQ it from the get-go. And I'm not saying it's wrong to do it from the get-go, because I actually believe that it's important to get your sounds right from the beginning. I'm a total proponent of not fixing it in the mix, but fixing it in the recording. But on the other side, I am also a proponent of not making the artist wait around. So rather than run back and forth from the control room to the live room, switching the selector and going back and asking the drummer to record and then listening back and then going back and doing it, by the time you do that for the 3 positions on the Lewitt, you've wasted 15 minutes and everyone is standing around waiting for you to get your shit together. So I'd rather record it flat and then apply the EQ that I want later, if at all, because I don't do that much EQing, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and I think also sometimes the deeper levels of settings on the tools we use, like microphones, it's always going to have that same situation. If you've got all these options and you're on a session with the artist, you're going to want to move quickly. And so sometimes those are more useful when we're recording ourselves and we have that, the leisure of being able to try a couple of things and then arrive at like, oh, this is my favorite. And then you always know to use that particular setting.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, this boils down to experience with your tools. You got to try everything to know how it sounds. But,
Exactly.
It's funny because I'm looking at the Lewitt Audio website right now for the microphone. And first of all, I noticed that there's samples of the condenser flat, the dynamic flat, and the dynamic and the condenser together. So I encourage the listeners to go there and listen to those samples so you know how this mic sounds. But if you scroll down the page, there's a picture of a guy laying on the floor with a screwdriver, trying to move the selector. And, one might think, yeah, that's a great ad for the, versatility of the mic. I think I don't want to be laying on the drum booth floor right now with a screwdriver. I'd rather do that in the, change the EQ in the mix later. So,
right.
It goes
that,
both
of course,
ways.
That's what's nice about that particular mic is that dual output. You kind of get that ability to just simply blend the two mics, and you're controlling the EQ just by simply choosing which mic to lean on a little bit more. Now, I will say about that mic, it's very cool, and I've found it really useful when I have used it on drums. It definitely gets a unique sound that I really dig, and you got to just remember to know where you put the custom cable. When we have all these things in the studio and there's custom cables that go with it, I always sort of hate when I get a piece of gear and it's got a custom power supply thing, and I'm like, all right, I gotta get out the tape and the Sharpie, and I'm labeling every piece of something,
Absolutely,
the name of that gear. This is the Sony or whatever it is.
Absolutely,
just so that I'd never lose it, because losing stuff in the studio, that's probably the biggest pain in the ass.
Yeah, I mean, EastSide Sound has one of the largest collection of microphones ever that I've encountered. Maybe Sylvia Massey is the only one that has a larger collection, and partly that is because it's the summation of the original collection of Lou Holtzman, who had opened EastSide Sound, the new collection of Andres Pollack, the new owner of EastSide Sound, who brought all these mics from Chile, and my collection of primarily ribbon microphones, primarily vintage ribbon microphones. So the three collections have joined into this massive collection, and it's so big that actually we built, when Andres Pollack took over EastSide Sound, we remodeled the lounge and built a beautiful client lounge with a kitchenette and, a space for people to chill. And we also built a new office with a new mic locker, with a steel reinforced double alarmed door and all. And until that point, we were keeping our mics mostly between the live room and the control room in some cabinets. And now all the mics are in this beautiful locker that's super reinforced, super secure, fingerprint access only, but they're all ordered beautifully between, Neumann's, condensers by Erlin's, condensers by Jay-Z, ribbons from Italy, ribbons from Japan, ribbons from France, ribbons from Poland, ribbons from the UK. I have them all beautifully organized, and this is why I'm connecting to your thought about the cable. All of the specific cables are either next to the mic with a label that says which mic they're for, because we also have all these vintage Neumanns with power supplies that are specific to a mic. So we have a whole shelf dedicated to Neumann power supplies only. We have U67s and 92s and 77s and, all these mics that require specific power. And then we have a few cases also in this mic locker. We have three cases that are, different colors that have specific microphone cables in them. And so on top of the Pelican case, there's a list of which cables the Pelican case contains. And then inside the Pelican case, there's 5 or 6, mic-specific proprietary cables with the proper label so that when you're looking for a specific cable, you know that it's in one of those three cases. You don't have to open them all. You look at the list on the case and you know what you're looking for.
That's great. It's great to be so organized, I guess. And maybe the new remodeling is so new that it hasn't been, challenged yet. But do you find that there's still, like, as soon as you get organized, along comes the exception to the rule, and you find out the best way to handle that?
Well, honestly, my gripe is not with the exception to the rule, but with the people not putting things back into place, and that's something that I always struggle with, and I have to always remind the people that have access to the mic locker that things need to go back on the proper shelf. Otherwise, the next person can't find them.
Yeah.
We have a straggler in the team. I won't mention names, but there's always that one person that doesn't put things back where they belong. And, we just have to keep pointing it out until hopefully they learn. And so the next person doesn't have to look for things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really speaks to the process of organizing your studio and how important that is. So whenever we're feeling like that's just a pain in the ass or that's not working on a record, we just should remind ourselves that that's absolutely working on a record. Just going through and organizing everything, making sure it's done in such a way that somebody else knows where to find something and where to put it back.
Yeah. I mean, that's the Swiss in me. I am overly organized, possibly to a fault. People have definitely commented on the fact that I want things very organized, and I like things organized. I grew up with a certain way of thinking about organization, which I think is more efficient and allows for things not to get lost, to be found, and to be quick. And, organizing mics is relatively easy. They're big objects on a shelf, but where organizational skills really come into play is organizing your files, because that's a whole other thing. In the studio, we have a separate cabinet where we keep our hard drives. Every engineer has a shelf. My shelf has, 10 different hard drives. They're all labeled and organized. I know which one belongs to Zorn, which one is the main drive, which one is the backup drive, and which one are the archival drives that contain all these last 15 years of records. And every hard drive has a printed paper on it that says which records are on there, just in the way we used to do with tape before hard drives came along. If you don't label the tape, how do you know what's on the tape? And I'm always amazed by how people will just throw something on a hard drive and put the hard drive somewhere and then have no idea where this stuff is when they're looking for a session that's 5 years old. So
give us more tips for that. So, because I deal with my own version of that, and I have a level of being organized, but again, it goes this far and then it fails. And so where do you find that you can? Well, first of all, how do you print out what's on a drive? Second of all, how do you know where to find that thing that's 5 years old?
Right. So you're asking me to give away all my cool tricks. So here we go. No, I'm just kidding. So first of all, I order by name or by date, and then I take a screenshot. And I print out I'm talking a screenshot of all the folders of what's present on that hard drive. I print out that screenshot and I put that with tape onto the hard drive so that I know I can have an instant look at what's on that hard drive. That's one.
Without having to plug it in.
Exactly. That's the analog trick. The digital counterpart of that is this great software, which I'm pulling up now so that I can give you the exact name for those who are interested. It's basically a software that allows you to connect a drive to your computer, and then it's called folder to list alias. Folder to list. I was just reading the alias. And folder to list, it takes a folder and it creates a list that you can then save in a text format. And so,
amazing.
And so I can, and what's cool about that list is that unlike the analog counterpart, which I stick on top of the hard drive, which only shows the folders, this list, you can also save the subfolders and the files. And it's all in a text file, so it only takes like less than half a meg of space. And so for every hard drive that I archive and put away in storage, I create this list and I save this list onto my hard drive, onto my main hard drive and onto the cloud, so that if I'm ever looking at something, I can just search through text through these files and instantly find the file, know which hard drive it's on, and then go to the storage locker or the hard drive cabinet and pick that one hard drive immediately and know that it's on there.
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session." Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the ultimate snare mixing trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. Yeah, I used to have a software, I think it was called like CD Finder or something like that. And it was meant to like catalog CDs, but you could also catalog hard drives. And every time, I mean, it'd be sweet to have something where every time you connect a drive, it automatically sees the files and stores them, unless there's stuff you don't want to be seen. But you know, and then you could just go look at it and find it. But that, what you're talking about is a very clever way to do that too. Every time you're pulling up the archive drives, especially for the ones that go on shelves where you're maybe not doing it every day, just that ability to have a searchable list and just search for it and then see which drive it was and go to the shelf and find that drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important also to put your hard drives in different places physically. Because, you know, I usually keep one drive at the studio, one drive at home. And if it's an archive drive that I'm done with meaning that it's full of data, I put that in storage. And then on the cloud, I always I don't save all the audio files on the cloud because it would take too much space, but I save all the Pro Tools files on the cloud. Those are much smaller. They're between 500K and a few megs. That way, if I ever need to access a Pro Tools file, I know it's there, and I can get the audio files from either one of those three locations.
Yeah, it's true. It does offer up a point. A lot of times we need to find an old Pro Tools file, not because we need the audio from it, but because we need to remember what the settings were, or the mix, or the plugins, or what did we do on that.
Yeah, whatever it is. Oftentimes, I'm not always the keeper of all the backups. In some cases, the client has the audio drives and they're their audio files, in which case I'm not responsible for the safekeeping or the backing up of the audio files, but I will retain a copy of the Pro Tools files so that if they ever want to come back and they don't have the Pro Tools files, I have especially for mixes, I always keep, Pro Tools files of mixes.
Right, because their archive might just be the last version that you did, but you might want to be able to get back to your earlier mixes and
yeah, I just want to make sure that if they have the audio files, I have the I consider the audio files to be their property and the Pro Tools files to be my property, in the sense that the Pro Tools file has my intellectual property, has my way of approaching the mix. They're paying for my expertise, and therefore that is my data. The audio file is their data. They paid for studio time. They own that data, and they should have the right and the responsibility to take that home with them and safe keep it and back it up.
Yeah. I try to always tell my clients, I'm doing everything I can to safe keep this stuff, but I'm not a library or an archive, so you need to take a copy home and make sure that you're keeping it safe, because I'll do my best to hold on to it, but I can't promise that it'll be here, 5 years from now when you need it.
Yeah, there's just so much data being created in this day and age that, it's too much for us to have to be responsible for everyone's data.
Yeah.
I definitely try to responsibilize, if that's a word, my clients, and make sure that, they know that, like, I always send them home with a drive. I tell every client to come with a drive, or I will sell them a drive. And I tell them that I will hold on to the data for about 10 days so that they have time to back it up to a second drive. But if they're booking the studio, it's their responsibility to bring a drive, and it's their responsibility to make sure that they have copies of it.
A couple of quick thoughts for the rock stars. One of the tools that we didn't mention yet, but I find really helpful too, as far as things like backup, is a service called Backblaze, which will automatically back up everything that is on your studio computer. So including external hard drives, and it's very, very seamless. It won't keep them forever up there as far as external drives goes, but anything that has been connected to your studio computer within 30 days is automatically backed up. So that becomes a great way also to just feel confident that, whatever you're working on recently is fully backed up and accessible and downloadable if needed and all that.
There's a few caveats to that, though, which is unless you keep your computer always on with your hard drives always on, and you have a super fast internet connection, you're not going to back up everything. It's not going to back up. It's just not going to be fast enough. If you have a hard drive and you connect it for the duration of a session, say you're working on a session for 2 days, and that drive has like 500 gigs of stuff, it's not going to upload 500 gigs of stuff in 2 days. That's the real problem with that. The other problem is, it's the rights of what's on there, the ownership of what's on there. If a client comes with their own personal hard drive and I connect it to my studio computer, I can't have that hard drive being uploaded to the cloud with their own personal data. It's just not, it's true. Not neither legal nor proper. So that's why I don't really use that kind of backup system. I do use a similar backup system at home to make sure that my own personal computer is backed up to the cloud. But like I said, the problem is I deal with so much data that I'm I'm working on at least 4 or 5 projects at any given time. And every week I get new files for a new project, whether it's a new song to mix or a new remix or a new something. And the upload speed wouldn't keep up with all the stuff that I put on my computer or my external hard drives. So I make sure that my internal computer is always backed up to the cloud through something like Backblaze. I use a different one, but then everything else that's data on external hard drives, I always make sure it's on multiple drives and it's on physical drives.
What about for those of us who are like, oh, the client never brings a drive, and then I have to tell them, and then they're like, oh, can I get it later? Do you have a process of letting people know ahead of your sessions what's expected of them, or what they should be thinking about as far as, being prepared for session, bringing a hard drive, any of those kind of things?
Yes, absolutely. I always remind them to bring a hard drive. I mean, to me, it's like bringing your own instrument. If you own that data, so it's in your best interest to bring a hard drive. And honestly, it's kind of irresponsible to show up to a studio without a hard drive. It's like saying, here, I'm paying you this much money to record something that I own, but I don't want a copy of it. Why would you do that? And for what? With the prices of hard drive these days being like, you can buy a 1 terabyte for $50 or $60 from Amazon, you really have no excuses to not buy a hard drive. So
how do you remind them so they don't just forget, show up and forgot?
I just do it via email when when we have the conversations about what's going to happen during the session. I tell them, make sure you bring a hard drive, make sure it's USB, C, or at least USB-A, so they don't show up with some old FireWire hard drive that I can't even connect anymore. And then I make sure that everything I use a software called Sync Folders Pro, which is a A to B backup software, so that even if I'm recording to my SSD drive, let's say the client brings a slow ass USB-A drive, and I don't want to risk recording onto that, I will still record to my SSD USB-C drive to make sure I have no glitches. But I use this Sync Folders Pro software to back up after every take to their hard drive, so that if something were to happen, let's say I had a computer meltdown and suddenly something gets corrupted, I have everything backed up to that moment, and I don't back up at the end of the day. I back up after every take, so that there's always 2 copies in 2 places.
Right on. Good tips. Well, we're coming up to the end of this, Marc, and I want to thank you for being here again. But let me hit you with a couple of quick questions, because I know you've always got the coolest stuff that you can just pull out. And by the way, I didn't get a chance to say this yet, but your sharp memory is just, it's a little bit mind-boggling, as you mentioned the names of so many musicians, and, you pull up details from memory. So we appreciate that. What is something physical or anything hardware tool related in the studio that you want to give a shout out to? Anything you're excited about lately, as far as gear-wise, or just something that you're really happy to have on a session?
I mean, my favorite piece of gear these days is the console, the Neve console, which I bought personally as an investment a couple years ago from an audio school in Mexico. SAE in Mexico was replacing their old analog consoles with Avid S6s for their school, and so they put this Neve in storage. And I've been going to Mexico to teach at SAE once a year. Usually I do a workshop in December for 2 days. I'll be doing it again this year. I asked them, what happened to the Neves you had in here? I was like, oh, we put them all in storage because we bought new Avid consoles. And so we worked out a deal. I bought it from them. It was not in perfect shape, and I knew that going in. In fact, it was in, pretty dire need of help. But with the help of an excellent tech from Neve that flew in from the UK several times to work on my console, I now have a 32-channel working console. And so I'm very proud of that. I put a lot of money and effort and time into having a console that's a Neve console with beautiful preamps. Recording pristine sounds is of uttermost importance to me.
Yeah.
And so when you want to record pristine sounds, the 2 things that make the biggest difference are the microphone and the preamp. So with that console, I basically took care of the entire preamp part of that equation. And then, of course, I'm very excited about my mic collection, which keeps growing. I have all these crazy, vintage, unique microphones from various parts of the world. I recently went to Japan, found a collector there and bought like 3 or 4 vintage Toshiba microphones, which are copies of RCAs from the 40s that Toshiba was making for the Japanese market.
Wow.
If you're interested in that, in the October edition of Recording Magazine, which I mentioned previously, there's an article I wrote. It's a part 2 of an article. The first part came out in October of 2022, the second part in October of 2023. And in that article, I talk about these Toshiba microphones and other RCA copies that I've acquired throughout the years, made by Italian makers, etc., etc.
Very cool.
And I'm always seeking out these obscure vintage, ribbon microphones. My collection
I remember
keeps
last
growing.
time we talked about the Rezo microphone.
Reslo, yeah.
Reslo, thank you. Yeah.
Reslos are beautiful British microphones. I own about 10 of those, which is way too many. I'm going to sell some. But, I'm a sucker for microphone. What can I say?
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. Okay, how about something software related? Anything you're excited about? Any new fun plugins or tools, or are you getting into creating synth sounds from the computer?
No, I don't really do synth sounds because I'm primarily interested in acoustic music. As for plugins, we mentioned Maor's Oven. That's one of my favorite ones. I use a lot of Mac DSP plugins. I use a lot of Sound Toys plugins. I use a lot of Isotope plugins, and I use a lot of Melda Productions. Those are the primarily the ones I use, and I love having my plugins. See a Freudian slip right there with microphones. I'm so obsessed. I love having my plugins I can go to and just find a tool for the job and not be bogged down by a million choices.
What parts of Isotope do you use most often?
The one I use the most is the RX noise reduction plugin. I use it mostly to remove guitar amp buzz or hiss from guitar tracks. I would say that's one of the primary applications. Sometimes I use it to remove room noise from super quiet, say, violin sections, for example, if I'm recording a film score, or if I'm recording, or if something was recorded outside in field recording scenarios, which I've done some of. Sometimes I use it to remove wind sounds, things like that.
That's great. Okay, cool. Well, let me go to my closing question. This one you've answered before. We'll do it again. Take the Wayback Studio machine and you get to go back and find yourself in the past. And you say, listen, Marc, I've come back to give you this bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing that you need to know to become a rock star of the recording studio. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself this time?
I forgot what advice I gave myself last time.
Me too.
So there's a risk of repeating myself. Knowing myself, I probably talked about the importance of preparation. And
Yeah.
so in an attempt to switch it up, this time I will say, I will give myself the advice to go to as many concerts and events as I possibly can. And it's an
Nice.
advice that I've been following and I've been giving to people. I go to about 500 shows a year. I've counted them recently because I was curious how many I managed to pack into a year. I go to 1 or 2 shows every night, so it comes out to about 500 shows a year. And what that has allowed me to do is, first of all, keep an open mind, stay up to date with what's going on, and constantly be inspired by what people are doing musically. But it's also a great way to meet people. So the side effect, I didn't do this in the beginning with this in mind, but the side effect that it has had is that you run into the people that are your community. And community is a very, very important thing to me. You run into your colleagues, you run into your past, present, and future clients, you run into your friends. All of these people that make up the fabric of the community that you are a part of and that you should try to be as present in as possible, most have the same interests you have. They go to the same concerts, the same venues. So I go to all these concerts to see live music, but I walk away with an experience of humanity and of interaction that's very important in the music scene.
That's beautiful, man. Well said. And I'm sure being in New York City makes it easier to be hitting 2 shows a night in various places.
Oh yeah.
But does this also speak to a daytime schedule for you in the studio? Do you sort of have a time that you might be running sessions where it leaves the evenings available to go see the shows?
Yes, that's very well observed, Watson. I try to schedule all my sessions to start around 10 o'clock, and I try not to go past 8 hours for multiple reasons. Most importantly, the preservation of your sanity and your hearing. I think the best work is done in those first 8 hours, and going past it becomes, problematic for multiple reasons. So I usually try to work, from 10 to 6 or 10 to 7 or sometimes 10 to 8 with a lunch break. And that means I have the evening off. So after I'm done in the studio, I go straight to whatever venue I have on my calendar for that day.
That's great. I do well at your studio. Those are my exact hours as well.
Cool. Come on down anytime.
All right, man. Marc, thank you so much for joining us. How would you like the rock stars to go, check out what you're doing? I mean, we'll have links in the show notes, of course. What if they're ready to make their next hit record and they just can't wait to come in and record with you?
I mean, that's easy. My website is marcurselli.com. My email is info@marcurselli.com. So if you know how to spell my name, you know how to spell my email. Social media is a great way to keep up to date with what I do because, like you mentioned earlier, I post walkthroughs of session setups. So you can see microphones being used. You can see instrumentation being used. I do posts about microphone history because I love them so much. I do posts about all the concerts I go to. So every day you'll see 1 or 2 concert clips showing up on my feed. And I do the occasional unboxing of a new piece of gear that I might have gotten or whatever. Recently I made a boxing up of a piece of gear because I sold an amp that was going to Australia and I just made a little stop motion video of me packing it up. So, I try to. Instagram for me has become the equivalent of a diary. Like in the old days, people would keep a diary and write in it at night. What I usually do is I write a post every day, sometimes 2, and I just write what I've done during that day. But because my life is so varied and full of interests, I'll give you a perfect example. Yesterday night, I went to 3 art exhibits, then I went to 2 concerts, and then I went to a movie. A movie which, by the way, I recommend. It's called Psychedelicized the history of the Electric Circus, which was a venue in the East Village in the late 1960s. It's a documentary. It just came out. Wonderful movie. I recommend. Before that, I saw 2 hardcore bands, and before that, I saw 3 art exhibits. That's in the space of, I left the house at 5. I wasn't working in the studio that day. So between 6 and midnight, in those 6 hours, I was able to pack that stuff up. And if you look at my Instagram for that day, you will see those 6 things showing up.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, we are incredibly honored and very aware of how lucky we are to get 2 hours of your time. So thank you so much, Marc, for doing this with us. And Rockstars, thanks for listening. Marc, I look forward to seeing you around the studio again sometime soon.
Yeah, come visit me at EastSide. You've never been. So next time you're in New York, please hit me up.
I'll do it for sure, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. Lewitt, Grace Design, Adam Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support the show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.